The Short Fuse podcasts are conversations with artists, writers, musicians, and others whose art reveals our communities through their lens and stirs us to seek change. I'm Elizabeth Howard, the producer and host of the Short Fuse podcast. We've recently introduced reading groups designed to reflect the creative process of the author. Each one is unique. In this first series, we're talking with Gay Walley, the author of the Venus as She Ages collection, 6 novels. Thank you for joining us. You can learn more about the Short Fuse and our reading groups at shortfusepodcast.com. Thank you. Just to put it in our minds a little bit, remind everybody that in our first program, we were talking about Gay's debut novel, which was published in 1999, Strings Attached, where we meet this young girl and her relationship with her alcoholic father, or as the critic described, her sardonic, blunt-spoken, appealingly appalling alcoholic father. We talked a little bit about the male gaze. I love that line. I often think the truth was that my father sold me at a card game. And I suppose the story puts everything in a child's language, big symbols and strong block letters, because let's face it, my own isn't that different. There just wasn't a card game. And then in May, we talked about To Any Lengths. So now we have a young woman getting married and terrified of what this might be, a prison. We have an unnamed character. And as you said, Gay, who's complicit in the failure of love, but not a victim. The character was, in your words, a nomad who cannot be colonized. He pulls hard at my mismatched feet. Move one for God's sakes, he yells at me. Make your feet both do the same thing. Marry me and get in or get out. So now the third book, Jude, is Prison Sex. And Peter Miller, who's been helping us with the technology, the Zoom technology this evening, is here. The book is dedicated to Peter. Oh. Peter is a writer, has written several novels and essays and plays. So I thought, Peter, that you can set up the book for us.
So I will give it a try. I have to say just on the outset that I love this book. I think it's one of the best books that Gay has written. I've read it twice, and I found that the second time I read it was even more enjoyable than the first time. The first time just sort of raced past, and the second time you just linger on some of the things that are in the book, from the observations, the interactions of the characters, and they're very, very delicious is the word I would describe, even though there is an undercurrent in the book, which is not the most positive undercurrent, but still Gay swims through that undercurrent and doesn't get dragged down by it. What I primarily think about Prison Sex is it's a book of very astute, very well-crafted observations. I think there's not a single scene in the book that happens either with David or Peter, where Mira doesn't have a really, really insightful observation. As a matter of fact, when I looked at the Amazon entry for the book, I noticed that the first reviewer reviewed it simply by putting a whole collection of her observations as his review. And, I thought that was very prescient and very, observant of him. The other thing I'd like to say about it is that Gay is not promiscuous with her feelings. She doesn't spew them out on the page, which tends to be what confessional novels tend to do. They just spray the feelings like a fire hose. Instead, Gay is like a river that runs very deep. And so the feelings are very powerful, but they're right underneath the words. You can see them hovering there underneath the words, and you can extrapolate from what she says and what happens, the actual thing, to the feelings that are there. Now, just looking at the structure of the book, it's a triad of 3 people, Gay, David, and Peter.
It's Mira, not Gay, Mira.
Lucky you, Gay.
It's the classic case of what every person in their life has had to confront, which is the pull of the erotic charge versus the temptation for security and solidity. Okay, that's a very, very powerful dilemma that most people at some point in their life find themselves in. Either they're married to a person and someone comes along and there's that powerful erotic charge, or you meet someone or two people and they have that opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think for example, it is the basic theme of film noir. What do you do? How do you deal with a woman or a man that presents you with that powerful erotic charge? How do you deal with that? And I think the way Gay navigates that in the book is absolutely fascinating. The fact that David is a prisoner and has been a prisoner for 10 years, and that she has been visiting him for all this time, adds that other element, that underneath element of incredible anticipation. What will happen when he is released? What's going to happen? And you can see the wheels in Gay's mind as she writes, clicking along, thinking about, what is going to happen? What's going to be the consequence? Simultaneously, she marries Peter at the same time that she is having this dalliance, this jail dalliance with David. So what does Peter represent? Peter represents some other aspect of Gay, solidity, someone who's settled, who has a profession, who wants to build a family. And then Gay goes through the classic dilemma. She gets pregnant. What do I do? Do I have a child? Do I not have a child? So it's something that I think artists, writers go through. In other words, do I want to give up or exchange this aspect, this part of my life, which is so important for this other part? So I think it encompasses a lot of experience that both men and women have. Now, I'll have to say, even though it's written from a woman's perspective, I think the idea that men go through very similar things. The dilemma of this woman versus that woman. Do I want to have a family? Do I want to have children? So there's a kind of universality about it. But putting all that, and one other observation I'll have, I think that Gay reminds me very much of French writers. Marguerite Yourcenar, Marcel Proust. I think she has a lot in common with those writers in her ability to perceive and see the invisible. See what's not always on the surface, but is underneath the surface. With that, I will turn it over and open the discussion to whomever. Oh, by the way, just the rules of the game. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, just raise your hand and I'll call on you.
Peter, thank you. One of the things that I was thinking of as I was reading it was, the idea that Gay, through these books, takes pleasure like a man. And that always, that's always difficult for a woman.
Right.
That's it. Yeah. And Gay, could you just, when did you write this? I mean, just a little bit of context for.
All right. Let me see. One moment. Let me work this out. I wrote it 25 years ago, whatever that was. So that would be the end of the 90s. We can pick you. Go ahead.
Okay. So you said she doesn't know what she's going to do with David, but I think she knew what she was going to do with Peter since book one. I'm sorry to say. I think that that was well decided what she was going to do with her normalcy, that she was definitely going to opt out. But David, I think through the book, we didn't know what she was going to do.
That's right. Gay, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's true, especially when you read them. I mean, as most of you know, I never intended these as a series. So, but if you read them as a series and you read 20 lengths, it's clear she doesn't want to be married. I think in Prison Sex, she doesn't really know how to, she feels guilty about not wanting to be married. And she feels, it's not that she doesn't like her husband. It's not that not that he's a bad guy at all. But that she senses that she's not cut out for that. I think she says, even when David wants to marry her, she senses she's not cut out for it. the dilemma in the book is, one of the dilemmas is, how are these three people in prison, and very different kinds of prison, going to get out? And it takes, the ending for everybody to get free.
How do you mean that, Gay? When you say they're in prison, all three of them, how do you interpret that?
Well, I mean, clearly David's in prison. Peter is in prison. He's married to a woman who isn't really loving to him and is not really committed. And he knows it in his heart. It's not that hard to figure out. And he knows she's not going to give him what he wants in his heart. He knows that. And so that's a kind of prison, but he doesn't know how to get out of it either. I think he asks her, there's a scene, he says, "What do you think I should do?" And she says, "Find somebody else." He's in a kind of a prison of wanting something from his wife that he cannot get. And she's in a prison of not quite understanding what it is she's after. But she knows she's not in a marriage that is sustaining. She's a bit suspicious of David, but he frees her in a certain way with his kind of malarkey. And she's in a prison sort of her own mind. I mean, she's in a prison of, I would say, of wanting to take agency in her own life. She's in that prison. And to actually act on being who she is, which she doesn't quite understand. And I think she feels guilty about it.
Gay, do you, over the years that Mira has visited David, what has changed in your mind? What has changed in her mind over those years? Do you think it's reached one point and that's it? Or has there been an evolution over those years? Because a lot of years that she's come to visit him.
I mean, I think at the beginning, she's a bit suspicious of him. I think she does think she's doing a good deed. He's sent to jail for 23 years for growing marijuana. That seems a bit extreme. And but the whole sort of, I think I say this in the book, the repression of it and the whole sort of becomes almost seductive and a kind of his situation. She identifies with his prison because she's in prison. So she never really trusts him. And as you see in the end, they have an affair when he gets out and she gets out, and but it's not a long-term affair.
Can I ask something? It's Margot.
Yes.
Okay. Why did you choose to write this one in the third person for all of them? For the character as well.
Because I had the concept. The book originally was conceived for me. I was interested in this idea of how do you have sex when you can't connect? And so if you notice the chapters have these solitary titles: longing, masturbation, visits, letters. And then it starts to be a breakout, madness and time. And I can't remember what. Madness is actually them all in their own mind. And heating up, so to speak, in their prison, so to speak, before a break. But I was interested in this concept of how do we, and it's also kind of Greek, this whole sort of thing of longing and not eros. Really, in my understanding of eros, the meaning of it really is longing, not consummation. So the whole thing is total. I was interested in depicting that. Well, I didn't really want to depict it in one person. I wanted to do the three of them and their respective situations. And so they are all visiting. She and her husband practically visit each other. They're writing letters. They're, as far as I'm concerned, all three are sort of having sex with themselves in their own mind, longing. And then the madness of being in their prisons. David, I think, is very, very upset in that scene. Peter is very frustrated with his wife. I think he's in Gloucester and he's kind of, annoyed with her. And it's starting to explode.
Well, I think you made a good point about longing, because longing was at the basis of relationships in books and in real life until recently. I mean, longing was the coin of the realm for those kinds of erotic attractions. And I think that you bring it into the present in your book. It comes into the present.
There's a line from the book. David says you can have sex in prison with yourself. It's the tenderness you miss. Her marriage is no longer tender, hence she and her husband are in prison.
Yeah. They're, as far as I'm concerned, all three are in prison. Mm-hmm. And the ending, and I posit in the book that something has to break, something has to die for something new to emerge. And it's an unhappy ending, but they all end up becoming who they really are. Mm-hmm. Sally Ann?
Hi, Peter. Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. Gosh,
great.
Just great. I just loved this book and have known you, forever, a lifetime, and have never read this book because these books, thankfully have just been published, which is fantastic, that they've been brought out by Murphy and that whole effort. And I just cannot believe how current it is. I couldn't help but thinking that the whole abortion thing, like, God, if it was happening this week, he would have just called one of these extreme people, and Peter would have, and just said, you've got to arrest this woman. She's about to abort my child. And this is not her decision. It was so clear that it really was your decision and you're grappling with that. And I just, that was very much to the forefront. But what I loved about it is that it's very easy to hear about relationships or read something, and it can be very cliched. Like, here's a woman that's cheating on her husband with a much more exciting guy that happens to be in prison. Yeah, right, he's in prison, no threat there. And that would be just sort of the cliche of the story, and you think, oh, I've heard that story, I've read that story, I know that story. And what I love about your writing and loved about the story is what Peter was alluding to, or really stating when he opened up the discussion, is how it was so, the feelings, the depth, and how you were able to capture what each character was feeling, including, the woman character, but certainly what David and Peter were feeling, not just about in their lives and the frustrations they were dealing with, but about each other. And it wasn't at all like, oh, who should I pick? This person or that person? It had so much depth to it. What I also thought was interesting is that, just amazing to me, I had visited a woman prisoner for a number of years who was a Cuban friend of mine, younger, and she'd gotten really arrogant with somebody at Kennedy Airport who were questioning her Canadian passport, because she had been Canadian but was living in the United States. Of course, could not travel on a Cuban passport, which she also was a Cuban citizen. But because she was Cuban, she just thought, nobody can touch me. That's sort of an arrogance there. There used to be, when they could, they felt very protected in this country. And so I get a call from her 16-year-old son, because I was like sort of a mentor to her in some ways, like a mother figure in some ways, I suppose. And he said, my mom's been arrested. And that started probably a 2.5-year weekly visit to a women's detention center in New Jersey that I would go over, about every week to see her. The thing is that how women are in prison, my little taste of that, it was so different than these men, like working out. And there you could see who was bringing the visitors to these women. They were the mothers, not the husbands. There are hardly any men in that visiting room. But there were the moms, the sisters, the aunts that were bringing the children to see their mothers. And there was also, I think my friend must have gained 50 pounds on candy bars in prison. where Dave is working out, and so many times, Mira was talking about like how hard his muscles, and that whole focus of like how men are, how they perceive their strength. And the women were just so soft in prison, the ones that I saw for that time. So I just loved how you captured how he felt as a prisoner. I just thought that that was just so well done, because it just wasn't a cliche of some tough guy in prison. Don't fuck with me kind of thing. It was so much more there was so much more nuance there. So I have to say, Gay, I just loved it. I loved this book. I read it last year. I started reading it when it first came out. And then I hadn't quite finished it all. And I sat down and read the whole thing in the last day. And it was just wonderful. It will be on my gift list of books to send people for holidays and birthdays. So I just loved it. I really did. I love your writing. Thank you.
Okay, can I follow up what Sally just said? How do you see this book in your corpus of work? Where you put it in terms of what you put into the book, how it's been received, and whatever else you want to talk about?
It's a good question. Teresa isn't here, but I sort of hid prison sex. I didn't really show it to anyone, and I was a little bit embarrassed by it. Murphy, when she said, "Send me these books that you haven't published," I sent it to her. And then she really liked it. And Therese really liked it, who's somebody that I work with a little bit. I've come to see that it does speak to people. I found it when I was embarrassed by it because I thought it was kind of violent in a way. The ending is violent to me. But I've come to terms with it. So where do I see it in my oeuvre? I mean, to me, it's an early book because there's a tightness to it. I think the later books are a little bit more free. Mm-hmm. So I look at the flaws in it, but I think it's very clear, and I think those characters are very fleshed out. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very. I think that when I was writing in those years, I was very brave.
You published all 6 books. So how do you feel about this book relative to the other 5 that you've published?
I really felt that book 2, 3, and 4 drop you into the depths of the character. I mean, it's one reason I wanted to keep them as a collection or quote unquote a series. I couldn't really make it a series because the main character or the protagonist changes at least by name, or sometimes she's Miriam, or Charlie. But I felt that book 2 and 3 are kind of the dropping into what she really needs to work through, the character does. And so though I felt myself as Gay sent the books to me, I remember when I was in book 2 and 3, I was really in almost a funk. I had to really go through it, to get through it. So I knew that the reader would have to go in there. But I also think that's part of what almost like the mission of the woman is. It's like the Inanna story, having to go down to the sister Ereshkigal that's in hell. It's like that's in the dark, in the underworld. And I think that's what's so powerful about book 2 and 3, and even a little bit 4. I mean, she's coming up out of it, and we'll see that as we go into the bed you lie in. And I think that's what made these books important, and also because she's really developing the characters, like you said, and you really are inside them. You really get to know Peter. You really get to know David and Mira as well. It's very clear. So those are kind of my reasons for going ahead and publishing, because I felt it moved you through the development of a woman in a way.
Does anyone else who've read the first 3 books at least have anything to say about,
I have something to say about chapter 4.
Okay.
Chapter 4 is my favorite because I found it. I listened first to Audible, and I hear Gay's interpretation, and I read it like a student. I said before, I read it like a student. I on it. So I wrote down that it's fast-paced, poetic, and the way she reads it is somewhat like West Side Story, like boys, easy boys, and the writing is very much like that to me. And then she brings up very staccato. The writing is very, very staccato to me, and rhythmical, very, very rhythmical. And she talks about Martha Graham and Copeland, and I love it. I just love it. When I read it over in words, I didn't get it that much, but the words are there about being poetic and being musical, and the writers. I love chapter 4. I really do. And of course, she talks about her mother, and she talks about other issues too, but I love the poetic storyline that I get out of chapter 4.
Great. Interesting. Chapter 4 is the letters. Any other commentaries? Any questions?
I thought also in the masturbation chapter, David sends her a page torn out of a magazine with a pair of Ferragamo sandals on it. She feels inexplicably lonely. She's relating only to surface. To buy the shoes would be messy. It would make her longing vibrant. The heels would click along the street for no one whom she could touch. And I just thought both the visual and the sounds, I mean, it opened up so much in your mind.
Elizabeth, this is what I love about this book, is that you're absolutely right in what you say, but there's more depth to that, even that, which is this idea of dressing up or putting on something and not necessarily having the person there to appreciate it. Yeah. Or, you're doing it for a reason, but it's not completed. It's not closed. The loop isn't closed. So that's very characteristic, I think, of this book, and somewhat of the other two, which is this depth that is just below the surface of the words.
And as you said, Peter, in your introduction, I mean, this is a very simple paragraph. It just, and yet your mind just go. It's a movie. It's very much like a script. I mean, you really can hear the woman. I love listening to heels. On the sidewalk. I mean, everything about it, the sexiness of, everything about it just conjures in your mind this eroticism.
Would make a great movie. Frank, you hearing that?
Is Frank with us?
There he is. We should introduce him.
Frank Vitale directed Gay's.
Frank's.
Yeah. Well, no. We were asked when Murphy was there for the filmmaker to come up. And I made sure that Gay came up with me because we are the filmmaker. I did a certain part of it, but Gay acted in it, wrote it, and was really the heart of that film. Now, you talked about a film, Peter. I think Gay has like a half dozen films lined up for us to do.
I don't know why you're sitting down.
Absolutely. No, I think all of her books could make for interesting film. This particular, because of this incredible erotic tension in this book, would just make a very powerful movie, assuming it was casted correctly. It would be very dramatic, intense moments. So Frank, get to it. Start raising money.
Well, one of the conditions is that I will make a film unless Gay's in it. So, and her friends are involved, Peter. So,
Correct. Yeah. You all think you're on a Zoom, but soon you'll be in a film.
It reminds me, I am legally required to tell you that this is being recorded. I should have told you.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Brenna taught me, what is the sign of a good actress? It was a very funny thing. Oh, about your tongue. Yeah, tell us that. You're on mute.
So to be a good actress, you have to be able to do two things. You have to be able to curl your lip and lift one eyebrow like. Then you're a good actress. My teacher in high school taught me that.
Yeah, if you had to pick an actress to play you besides you, who would it be?
I don't know. I do know that I got a very nice left-handed compliment from the erotic fire movies on Amazon. And somebody saw it because they mistakenly put it under Juliette Binoche's films. Right. So they said this person who saw it loves Juliette Binoche. And so pushes erotic fire only to be confronted with me. And
it might make a good you.
She'd be good. She'd be good. She'd be good.
Speaking of that, I do want to show one thing. This is a book that Gay published called Erotic Fire, the Unattainable. And it's a book of aphorisms. And if you like, and I know you do, prison sex, you'll find this also a very enjoyable book. So just make note of it. It's on Amazon.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Anne, you have anything you want to talk about?
A couple of things that really struck me. I loved, there was one point because she's visiting David quite often. And then there's one time when you describe the whole drill that the women go through. So, oh my God, this room to this room, and putting things in lockers, and they're going to all look like Gloria Swanson with their last bit of lipstick. It just was so, I could just picture it, and also it really brought home just what it meant for her to go, and also I think there is a lot of courage for a woman to go visit somebody in prison. It's something people want to, like, somebody's in prison, you want to put it out of your mind and out of your life, but it just really brought it home, the courage and the eroticism, just the repressed, the thing of you can't have sex with this person, so it's all you can think about. It just it was also loaded. It just picturing the different types of women. We're the ones, and who's attractive, who's the dumpier ones, the mothers. It was like, oh God, it was just really well done. And another thing, I love when David has conversations with Will about Mira, it was so seeing what he was wanting. He was just open and vulnerable. And then with Peter, you just know he just wants tradition, and he wants a kid. He wants just be with me, and and you feel for him too. So it's just, anyway, those are my comments.
Anna.
I had a hard time getting into the book, I admit to this. And I felt distracted, partly because it was, I've been writing about voice behavior and psychological safety. I have to always bring in my work because that's what I'm doing. And I felt like there was a different voice in this book, and it didn't follow the voice that I read in the previous book. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay. And I tend to visualize as I read, and I picture very heavily. So it's like, this is not you writing. That's what I felt. That's what I pictured. I felt that there was another person. And so I had to adjust to that. That was hard. And then I realized that admittedly, I'm on the number of timelines right now, and I'm distracted by the news. And I just finished that Psychic Warrior book, which was really deep into the ether kinds of thinking. And it could be that all of that leaned into how I read you, or how I read the book. And so I felt that I had to put it aside because I didn't want to treat it as homework. I wanted to treat it as, obviously there's something more to this because I'm having all these pictures and reactions, and like, no, not yet. I don't want to go this, so I put it aside, and I'm hearing all the comments, and I thought, I can't relate to the book as much as others. And that probably will kick off a whole other thing for me and hopefully go into the paper that I'm writing right now. And by the way, I've just finished a 30-page paper thanks to reading your books and the other one. So it obviously is causing my brain to be responsive. So I thank you for that. So the struggle is, then I've been reading these developmental theories too, and I thought, oh, she's struggling with moving from the socialized mind to the self-authorizing and self-transforming mind. And it could be that I wasn't able, somehow there was something missing for me in between. And it's, the whole masturbatory thing is very impulsive kind of behavior that precedes that socialized mind. And then the whole thing about marriage and children is that socialized, like there's the should of woman, you should want these things. And then the self-authorizing mind is more like, who are you really? And so I keep hunting for you, and I don't know what it is yet. So I have to probably finish the series, and probably it'll never be answered. But I just feel like you're always on top of it, and that I have to do the work of pulling myself in.
No, it's understandable. This book was born out of a concept as opposed to a story like the other books I've written. Right. The concept being, what is it like when you can't be when you are trapped in yourself and you can't be with another person? And how do you, what is eros when you are in prison, so to speak?
But what I'm interested in is what happens to your imagination, because again, I'm working off of what is reality, sort of like, so I feel like somehow, and I have to go back, and it makes me now thinking maybe I should really study these books because there's much more. I have the feeling that there's something more to it, that they're very symbolic.
Although I will tell you, each one is very different from each other. But
I would agree with that. But one of the things I was left with when I was reading your material, and I'm sorry now for getting suddenly chatty, but was something that you said last time, was that you mentioned that you grew, that you learned from your experiences and there was growth. And that got me very curious about how you saw yourself grow.
I can't believe I said that. Was that a question?
And an observation.
I wouldn't say I came to any tremendous epiphany or any. I won't say I came out onto the plane knowing everything, but I will say, I think just with age, I'm more comfortable. I mean, she unfetters herself. She has different sublimations in each book. And actually the next book to me is it won't be to other people, I don't think, but I've been wrong about everything, but is the most interesting in that she actually confronts what it is holding her back. And once she gets past that by living through it, then she treks along, and the other books are much easier. So it's interesting. She hasn't got there yet in this book 3.
Well, I guess I'm floating with you in the book. That's what I don't get the sense. I feel like for me, I feel like there's not an emotional connection almost to it. And it may be my projection, probably is, based on my years of analysis. But, the idea that it's just kind of looking for that. I guess I will discover it. That's what you're telling me. Okay, thank you.
Brenna, thank you.
And thank you for saying that, Anna. I also had trouble getting into the story. This is my own, so I don't mean to take this on too personal a level, but what finally clicked for me was on page 87, where David is talking about being in prison and having a visitor come. and how he just doesn't want to go through the energy of having his brother come. About you feel like you have to make the visit worthwhile for your visitor. You have to show that you're still strong and hip and so on. And it's work. And sometimes you're just too damn sad and tired and you just rather be alone. And you don't want to strain that you are really free, even though you are not. And so I related to that from my personal point of view from being in the pandemic and still, because I'm not able to be with other people. And that's how it feels to me to be in prison. And then I could go back and I could relate on the prison level to a lot of the, once I read that passage, it kind of was a breakthrough for me in terms of relating to the people who felt that they were in prison in their own ways. So just a particular little point. And I just want to say, I think that the whole one other paragraph that I really loved was on page 68, where you're talking about women's inverted power in prison and getting the food and the vending machines, and she holds the money and all of that. I thought that was a really brilliant paragraph. I loved that too. But I did relate to it better after I had trouble until I could really connect with that sense of what it's like to be in prison.
I think a lot of people have trouble reading about somebody in prison. You know, it was something.
The book has a kind of inverted structure, which is that most novels are narratives, okay, with a little bit of observation thrown in. Mm-hmm. Your observation with a little bit of narrative thrown in, okay? Right. So it has a very unusual structure for a novel. As I said, more like a French New Wave novel. But I did want to ask one other question, and we'll throw it open again. How would you connect, or do you make any connection at all between the relationship that the woman character, Mira, has with David and the one that, I forget her name in the first book, and Strings Attached, with her father? Is there any connection at all, or is it just not?
Well, I think Peter accuses her of that. I get mixed up what happens in each book, but I think Peter accuses her that yes, she comes back after David is mad at her for getting married. And Peter says, these guys take you back to the bar and to the golden talkers, he said. He said, they're golden talkers. And he said, I have a golden heart. But I think her father is an outlier, whereas most people would be judgmental of somebody in prison and judgmental of the stupidity of growing marijuana in excess when it's illegal. She doesn't have that because she's been around men that are not following the rules. Mm-hmm. So yes, I would not say he's like a father. And maybe, I mean, sort of to go back to the sort of sexual theme of the book, which is all sublimated sex, or more imprisoned sex, being with a man and having a flirtation that cannot be consummated is like being with her father.
Well, that raises a whole issue. Having judgment versus being judgmental are two different kinds of behaviors. So, again, the attraction, and I think we started this discussion last time. To me, I think about it in social cultural terms. And so I'm looking for that richness. I'm looking for that sensibility of where you are when you're in prison. What I imagine it, because I haven't been there, you have that experience, but how I imagine it to be is has a different texture to it. So that's what I'm looking for. I don't see the texture in the prison experience that you describe. I guess that's why I'm struggling with my sense of reality versus going into how you.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to make any commentary on prison. I was just trying to do this triangle do these three people.
Right. I realize that.
Yeah.
I realize that.
I wasn't equipped to make that commentary on prison.
I guess I'm not looking for a political comment or a social comment. I'm looking for a description of the reality. And to me, French noir films and books, especially if you read like Latin American authors, you get a sense of music and texture with lots of chords and lots of drama. And I guess, more. And I think with French films, everything is laid out very, stretched out so that you get caught into the web. So that's what I was seeking. And I think I'm just, reading is a very personal experience. And so we bring our filters to it. So it's really interesting to me to hear.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
People respond to it. So I appreciate you listening to my.
No,
I was thinking about that. That's so interesting. When it brought back so many memories of visiting my friend in prison. And I'll never forget the first time, because I also had to go through security checks and, you had to put your bag into a locker and, all of that and go through different rooms a couple different rooms, take your shoes off, all of that. And finally getting into the visiting area. But I'll never forget, it was in the evening, coming out into a parking lot and feeling, it was a cold night and just sort of a beautiful sky, but feeling this incredible sense of freedom that I had not felt at all, been aware of in my life. Because even just being locked up, knowing that hearing those doors shut behind you and being with somebody with all these restrictions, couldn't go near the vending machines, had to sit away from them, couldn't hug them, couldn't do all of this. I wasn't even aware of it until I walked out of there and it was like, oh my God, I am so free. I can get in this car and drive away. And that's what I thought that the character did. It's funny, I don't know if this is an appropriate thing, but I had met Gay when I was 20 and Gay was 18 in Boston. And I remember Gay then was living in Gloucester, which is the little town that, that's referenced in the book too. And I remember visiting her, I guess I was probably like 21 or whatever, and she was there. And I remember her, this has a point to it, like just being so frustrated because she had to work some menial job as a waitress or whatever. And all she wanted to do was write. I remember thinking at the time, there's a lot of writers out there, but it was such a burning desire. You could sense it. And I never really thought much about it. So when this book came out, I was thinking, well, I knew her. Is it 25 years ago about her? I mean, I've known her all this time and known her well. And I thought, I bet this is going to be a little bit like kind of like how a 45-year-old thinks, versus how somebody in their early 70s might think. And I really expected that. I expected, knowing her so well, that I would kind of, oh no, Gay wouldn't even say that today. That wouldn't be Gay. I mean, that wouldn't be this writer today. And what I couldn't believe was how I had no sense of that at all. I had the sense that this could have been written yesterday. Now, I'm sure Gay, as an author, looks at this and rips it apart and, would not do this or say that. But as a reader, and really just a reader that just have picked this up in the last year, but really reread it again, I thought, that's amazing that there's an essence of a good writer that probably is imprinted on them at a very young age, you know what I mean, or a much younger age, and that it's almost ageless, like their message or how they're trying to define themselves or how they're struggling with themselves or with life or whatever it is. And it was so interesting to me that it wasn't dated. Just in knowing somebody, because I don't really know any other author as well as I know Gay. And I thought, wow, that's amazing that something can be timeless And I thought that was so interesting that you don't have to be dated. I bet if I read something that Gay wrote probably at 21, I would see Gay in that. It would be there she would be as a 21-year-old, getting that point across or struggling in that way or trying to express herself. So that was very interesting to me.
Robin.
Oh, I have no question. I said no one's talking about the ends, how it kind of all ties in or ties up or ends kind of nice, or perhaps that people freed in a way.
Yeah, they get free. Yeah.
Yeah, she's freed of her normalcy. David's freed out of prison, and Peter's freed to have a baby, and things kind of work out for all of them in their ways, and all is well.
Yeah.
Right. Broken out. That's right. Everyone's broken out.
Yeah, no, it has a kind of a strange ending. I just want to say to those people who have come religiously, like Anne and Brenna and Anna and Robin and Mary and Murphy, I just want to say, A, thank you, and B, we're going to start up in the fall, but the books are very different, the ones that follow now. That this is the end of the prison series, so no more prison. And so you'll see that you're on to now. The next one is where she confronts something. The one after is when her two favorite writers come back to life and they go on a trip together, the three of them. And the last one is about being an older woman and not something I would know about.
If you have not seen Gay's and Frank's film, it's on Amazon, and you will meet some people there you might know. So
you will indeed.